Brief overview. Brief overview. Brief overview of current uses of epidemiology. Epidemiologists are indebted to J. and Morris, who published a list of 7 uses of epidemiology. 5 of these uses are shown in the text box. Among the principles of epidemiology are the following: historical uses, studying historical use. Historical use study the history of health populations. Community health use diagnose the health of community. Health health services use study the working of health services. Risk assessment use estimate individual risks of disease, accident, or defect. Disease casualty use search for the causes of health and disease. Here's historical use. The historical use of epidemiology documents the patterns, types, and causes of morbidity and mortality over time. Since the early 1900s in the developed countries, the causes of mortality have shifted from those related primarily to the infectious and communicable diseases to chronic conditions. These illustrated by the changes over the time in causes of mortality in the United States. For example, Figure 1.3 shows the decline in the rate of infectious disease mortality between 1900 and 1996. Mortality from infectious disease rose sharply during an influenza pandemic of 1918 and then continued downward trend. In the early 1900s, in the early 1900s, in the early 1800s, mortality from the infectious diseases increased again because of the impact of human immunodeficiency virus, HIV. Mortality from HIV disease subsequently declined and caused 1,200 deaths in 2005. During that year, the leading cause of death were heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Refer to Chapter 2 for more information. The term the epidemiologic transition describes the shift in the patterns of morbidity and mortality from The term epidemiologic transition describes the shift in the patterns of morbidity and mortality from causes related primarily to the infectious and communicable diseases to causes associated with chronic degenerative diseases. The epidemiologic the epidemiologic dissociation con- coincidences with demographic transition, a shift from high birth rates and death rates found in agrarian societies to much lower birth and death rates in developed countries. Figure 1.4 shows the stage of epidemiologic transition across the top and the stage of demographic transition across the bottom. The rate of infectious disease mortality by year, United States, 1900 1996. Figure 1.4 demographic epidemiologic transition of framework. Stage of epidemic transition. Stage of demographic transition. Pestilence and famine, receding pandemics, degenerative and man-made diseases, crude birth rate, delayed degenerative diseases, and emerging infectious. Figure 1.4 shows the stage of epidemiologic transition across the top and the stage of across the top. Across the top and the stage of demographic transition across the bottom. These two kinds of transition parallel one another over time. The figure is subdivided into 4 segments: pre, early, late, and post. Refer to the figure for definitions of these stages. At present, the United States in the post-transition stage, which is dominated by diseases associated with personal behavior, adverse lifestyle, and emerging infections. Community health use. Morris described this use as follows: to diagnose the health of the community and the condition of the people, to measure the true dimensions and distribution of ill health in terms of incidence and prevalence, disability and mortality, to set health problems in perspective and to define their relative importance, to identify groups needing special attention. Examples of characteristics that affect health of community are age, sex distribution, racial ethnic makeup, socioeconomic status, employment and unemployment rates, access to health care services, population density, and residential morbidity. These variables are reflected in a wide range of outcomes: life expectancy, social conditions, and patterns of morbidity and mortality. These characteristics will be covered in more detail in Chapter 4, Descriptive Epidemiology, and Chapter 6, Analytic Epidemiology section on ecologic studies, health and services use. Morris also posed that epidemiology would be used to study the work of health services with view of their improvement. Operational services translates knowledge of changing community health and expectations in the terms of needs for services and measures. How these are met. Operations research is defined Operations research is defined as a type of study of the placement of health services in a community and the optimum utilization of such services. Epidemiology helps to provide quantitative information regarding the availability of and cost of healthcare services. Epidemiologic studies and aid planners in determining what services are needed in a community and what services are duplicated unnecessarily. Provision of health services is exceedingly costly for society. Epidemiologic methods can be used to weigh cost issues against quality of services in order to maximize cost of effectiveness. Epidemiologic findings are relevant in current era of managed care. Epidemiologic findings are relevant to current era of managed care through disease management. This term refers to a method of reducing healthcare costs by providing integrated care for chronic conditions, example heart disease, hypertension, and diabetes. Risk assessment use. According to Morris, the application was to estimate from the degree of experience that are individual risks on average disease, accident, and defect, the chances of avoiding them. Risk is the probability an event will occur. Example that an individual will become ill or die within a set period of the time or by a certain age. Risk factor is exposure that exposure that is associated with the disease, morbidity, mortality, or adverse health outcome. For example, cigarette smoking increases the risk of contracting certain forms of cancer, including lung cancer. Epidemiologic studies provide quantitative measurements of risk to help. Epidemiologic studies provide quantitative measurements of risk to health through methodology known as risk assessment. One of the major cornerstones of health policy development, risk assessment, and its four components will be covered in Chapter 7. Disease casualty use. With respect to this use, Morris wrote search. With respect to this use, Morris wrote search for causes of health and disease by computing the experience of groups defined by their composition, inheritance, and experience, their behavior, and environments. The search for causes of disease and other health outcomes is one of the most important uses of epidemiology. In order to assess potential causal association, epidemiologists need to consider a set of criteria that must be satisfied. The search of causes of disease and other health outcomes is One of the most important uses of epidemiology. In order to assess potential causation associations, epidemiologists need to consider a set of criteria that must be classified. Refer to Chapter 2 for more information. Possible associations can be evaluated by the analytic study designs. These designs include case control, cohort studies, and other analytic studies involve natural experiments, randomized control clinical trials, and community trials. Analytic studies designs are discussed in Chapter 6. We will learn the study designs, whether observational or analytic, can be arranged in hierarchy according to our confidence in the validity of validity validity according to our confidence in the validity of the information they provide. Ethics and philosophy, epidemiology, description of ethics in research. The final topic in this chapter relates to the ethics and epidemiology. The term ethics refers to norms for conducts. Norms for conducts that norms for conducts that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. David B. Resnick, bioethics for the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, has written the following statement about ethics in research. When most people think of ethics or morals, they think of rules for distinguishing between right and wrong, such as the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A code of professional conduct like Hippocratic oath. First of all, do no harm. First of all, do no harm. A religious creed like the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, or a wise aphorisms sick like saying confluxus. This is the most common way of defining ethics. Ethics This is the this is the most common way of defining ethics. Ethics are norms for conduct that distinguish between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Many different disciplines, institutions, and professions have norms for behaviors that suit their particular aims and goals. These norms also help members of the discipline to coordinate their actions or activities and to establish the public trust of discipline. For example, ethical norms govern conduct in medicine, law, engineering, and business. Ethical norms also serve the aims or goals of research and apply to people who conduct scientific research or other scholarly or creative activities. And there is specialized discipline, research ethics, which studies these norms. There are several reasons why it is important to adhere to ethical norms in research. First, some of these norms promote aims of research, such as knowledge, truth, avoidance of error. For example, prohibitions against fabricating, falsifying, or misrepresenting research data promote the truth and avoid error. Second, since the research often involves a great deal of cooperation and coordination among many different people in different disciplines and institutions, many of these ethical standards promote many of the many of these ethical standards promote values that are essential to collaborative work, such as trust, accountability, mutual respect, and fairness. For example, many ethical norms in research, such as guidelines for authorship, copyright, and patenting policies, data sharing policies, and confidentiality rules in peer review, are designed to protect intellectual property interests while encouraging collaboration. Most researchers want to receive credit for their contributions and do not want to have their ideas stolen or disclosed prematurely. Third, many ethical norms, many of the ethical norms help to ensure that researchers can be held accountable to the public. For instance, federal policies on research misconduct, on conflicts of interest, on the human subjects, protections, and on animal care use are necessary in order to make sure researchers who are funded by the public money can be held accountable to the public. Fourth, ethical norms in research are also help build support for research. People are more likely to fund a research project if they can trust the quality and integrity of the research. Finally, many of the norms promote a variety of other important moral and social values, such as social social values such as social responsibility, human rights, animal welfare, compliance with the law, and health and safety. Ethical 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 lapses in research can significantly do harm to human and animal subjects, students, and the public. For example, a researcher who fabricates data in a clinical trial may harm or even kill patients, and a researcher who fails to abide by regulations and guidelines relating to the radiation and biological safety may jeopardize his health and safety for the health and safety of staffs and students. Description of syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease associated with the bacterial agent Tripnonomia syphilis can have both acute, having sudden onset, or chronic long-term phases. The initial infection, primary infection, produces a painless sore called a chancre that appears approximately 3 weeks after exposure. After the primary lesion seems to resolve, a secondary infection, example, a rash on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet may appear in about two months. This secondary infection resolves several weeks or months later and then becomes a latent infection. Some infections will remain latent for life and others will progress to tertiary syphilis, resulting in diseases in the central nervous system, cardiovascular system, or other various parts of organs of the body. At present, syphilis is treatable with penicillin and other antibiotics. Before advent of modern antibiotics, compounds that contain mercury or arsenic were used to treat syphilis. These treatments were not completely effective and were often harmful. Stenosis, narrowing of the coronary arteries due to cardiovascular syphilis. Ethical violation, U.S. Public Health Service, syphilis study at Tuskegee. The U.S. Public Health The U.S. Public Health Service, in conjunction with the Tuskegee Institute, began a syphilis investigation in 1932 that spanned for 40 years. Refer to text box for a description of the syphilis. The purpose of the study was to record the natural history of syphilis in hopes of justifying treatment programs for blacks. The purpose of the study was to record the natural history of syphilis in hopes for justifying treatment programs for blacks. It was called the Tuskegee study of the untreated syphilis in Negro male. A total of 600 African men, 399 syphilis cases, and 200 syphilis-free controls participated in the study. The participants in the Tuskegee study never gave informed consent to participate. Researchers told men that they were being treated for bad blood, and local term used to describe several alarming elements, including syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. Appropriate treatment of syphilis was never offered, despite the fact that as early as 1947, penicillin was known to be efficacious. A class action lawsuit filed on the behalf of men in 1973 resulted in 10 million settlements plus medical and health benefits. Figure 1.6 shows that the nurse conversing with some of the participants in the study. Nowadays, universities maintain human subjects review boards to ensure that all research protocols that involve human beings and animals are reviewed to make certain that the procedures meet requirements for informed consent and other ethical standards. In addition, many professional organizations have adopted codes of personal ethics to prevent ethical lapses by their members. For example, epidemiologists operate according to a set of core values that guide practice in the field. The American College of Epidemiology was developed in the Statement of Epidemics Guidelines. Five of the guidelines have been abstracted from ACE ethics statements. Refer to text box. Conclusion. Ethics guidelines for epidemiologists. Minimizing risk and protecting the welfare of research subjects. Obtaining an informed consent of participants. Submitting proposed studies of ethical review. Maintaining public trust. Meeting obligations to communities. Epidemiologists study the occurrence of diseases and health outcomes in populations. Findings from epidemiology research are reported frequently in the popular media. For example, disease outbreaks, such as those caused by foodborne illness, often command public attention. Chapter 1 defines some of the terms that are used to describe the disease outbreaks. Discuss the scope of application of epidemiology and presented information on its interdisciplinary conclusion. Epidemiologic methods are applicable to many types of health-related issues, from health infections, diseases to violence in schools. Although many people consider epidemiology to be primary in medical subject, it is also a liberal arts discipline. In many respects, epidemiology provides training in generally applicable skills such as critical thinking ability and the use of scientific method. Epidemiology is primarily an observable science that involves describing the occurrence of disease in populations. Descriptive epidemiology and the researching the etiology of disease. Analytic epidemiology, the history of epidemiology extends over the centuries, beginning during classical and antiquity at the time of ancient Greeks. Subsequent historical events included the identification of infectious disease agents, Snow's use of methods such as the case mapping and data tabulation that remain relevant today. Recent history has included eradication of smallpox and development of provided procedures of control chronic diseases. Chapter 1 concluded with a review of the uses of epidemiology and discussion of ethical aspects of the epidemiological research.